And with me now is someone who's come to us all the way from Hawaii, Dr. Charles E. Morrison, the president of the East-West Center. Thank you for joining us today. Now, I have to ask you, the conference has been going on for 2 days now. What are your thoughts on the issues that have been discussed and the global movement of moderates as it is?
Well, I'll say just two things to begin with. Maybe one is that I very much welcome this movement. The Prime Minister actually gave a speech on the global movement of moderates at my institution in Hawaii.
Right.
And so it's nice to see it actually in fruition and so quickly, you know. And the second thing is there's been a lot of talk about terrorism and violence and religion. And I think it's important to remember that religion is not the cause of violence and extremism. The teachings of all the great religions are for peace, justice, charity. And so it's really grievances, and there are grievances around the world, and we have to tackle those grievances, I think, if we're going to really be successful as moderates.
Why do you think then religion has come to the forefront of the world's conflicts?
Well, unfortunately, many of the grievances are in Islamic countries, especially in the Middle East, not in Malaysia, not in Indonesia, not even in Bangladesh, but it's largely a Middle Eastern phenomenon. And some of that relates to the Israeli-Palestinian problem, but some of it relates to all the systems that we saw, some of which have been toppled now in North Africa and in the Middle East. So people, I mean, at the present time in world history, I suppose there's been more extremism in these countries because there's also been more oppression.
Right. Speaking of oppression, let's bring things closer to home. Right. The recent thawing of relations between Myanmar and the United States. What do you make of that?
Well, I was quite surprised at how quickly it's developed in the last just year or so. But it's obviously very positive. We're not sure how far it will go. But I think the military is definitely been making changes. And the most interesting thing is that Aung San Suu Kyi, who has been considered to be not so moderate, but be quite stubborn, is one of those who's saying, you know, she's ready to work with this government now and this leader. And
but if you think about it, there really is no way her party can gain a majority. So is she being moderate in that sense by compromising?
Maybe her party can't gain a majority. It's a and you know, it's a party that it's very hard to tell what its true strength is because it's been so suppressed, and its leadership has been very old. But whether that party now is able to morph into a much larger movement, or whether it remains a minority voice, but there'll be other voices in the Burmese system, I just don't know at this point. If it becomes very big, then it may be that there'll be trouble ahead, because I don't think the military is going to give up its dominant position, even if it's willing to allow some freedom of expression.
Let's talk a little bit about the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Sure.
Now, a successful conclusion to the TPP negotiations would arguably be beneficial to its recipients' economies. Could you elaborate on what some of these benefits would be? Well,
the theory of the TPP is that it's supposed to address 21st century issues. And these are not the traditional border barriers like tariffs and non-tariff barriers, but they're mutual recognition standards, services industry kinds of things. And so I think an economy like Malaysia, which is moving from a manufacturing and agricultural and mineral-based economy to an economy where I think services, including educational services, insurance, and so forth.
Prime Minister calls it the knowledge-based economy.
Yes, knowledge-based economy, okay. Stands to gain from TPP negotiations, but there's lots of difficult issues there, and whether the negotiation is ever completed or not, we'll have to see. And even if it's completed, it has to be ratified in some of these countries like the United States, which is going to be difficult. So I think it's good that it's come this far, and even if it never succeeds, and of course I hope it does, but if it never does, we'll have learned a lot through the negotiating process about each other's interests, and I think a lot of smaller scale agreements will come out. It's very ambitious.
Right. Now, with things like the TPP, you know, we're already seeing that the United States is kind of pivoting its priority in the Asia-Pacific region. Is this a sign of things to come?
Well, I think it's the sign of things to come, and I think it's very logical. More than 50% of the world's people are in the Asia-Pacific region, as I define it, including South Asia.
Yeah.
And so, and now about 35% of the world's income, well over half of the world's financial reserves. And so, looking at the world from the U.S. point of view, Asia-Pacific is far more important to our interests systemically than any other part of the region. And so we should have been pivoted toward Asia for longer than we're now saying we are.
Right. And, the rise of Asia is pretty much inevitable, and a lot of people are talking about China.
Yeah.
What about Japan?
Well, Japan has got some problems which China may have in the future. And I think the biggest problem is really the demographic change in Japan. It's going through this extremely rapid aging process. And you could talk about the issues in Europe that are very much demographically based. But those will be even greater in Japan, and how they're going to write their financial system is a real question here. And then you have the feeling in Japan that somehow they're being overshadowed by China, and so they know they have to work with China, but it's a little uncomfortable for them because they've been used to being the larger economy in the region for a number of years. So it's a country that will not be a problem in any aggressive sense, but it's a country that could be a problem in the sense that Japan can't quite bear the weight that it should in global leadership.
Yeah, it leads to my next question. On the economic outlook, China will rival the United States GDP. But what about on the political stage and their foreign policy and their human rights record?
Yeah. Well, of course, China is still not quite a global power in the sense that it has a global perspective. And China is still a developing country that is focused on its own interests. And even the economic realm, it's less concerned about building global systems than it is about how to get enough resources for China for its next stage of development. And it's also very worried about being caught in a middle income trap and not moving toward a value-added economy. And human rights, I think, anybody of my age, if I compare China now with China 25 years ago, for all the kind of incidents with dissidents that you see, the fact is that the great majority of Chinese people can speak much more openly about many things that Chinese couldn't speak about before. They do have village elections. I thought it was very interesting that one of the recent villages where there was a kind of local rebellion, they made the guy who led that now the party leader. It's kind of an interesting way of handling it. So this is but it's a question in China's case. It doesn't have a system that that is kind of compatible with a modern economic system, and so how the evolution of Chinese political life occurs is still a question mark. And if it goes bad, then you could have a China that becomes a real problem, because it'll be a powerful China, but it may be a highly nationalistic China, or it may be a China that is disorganized and not have a center of gravity. So the jury is still out. But I'm very optimistic about China.
Another delegate that I spoke to said that the other problem with China is that it doesn't seem to be working when it comes to the economy anyway, for its own people. Could this be a problem that could then implode from within?
Yes, I think if China has one of the more inequitable income distributions in the world at the present time, and what makes it less problematic is that so far even rich people are getting rich fast, poor people are also getting rich. But if, say, because of the euro crisis or a downturn in the world economy generally, China went through a period of retrenchment, you could still have rich people getting richer, but people who thought they were going to get rich start to get poor. And then I think you could have some serious problems in China.
Right. And, the one place that we have seen problems implode from within is, of course, the Middle East.
Yes.
What do organizations or concepts like the global movement of moderates, what are we able to do for, places like that with this conflict?
Well, I think that a global movement of moderates needs to have 2 or 3 goals. And, of course, will be the organizers and particularly the Malaysian leadership, I think, that will help set those goals. But I hope that one of the goals would be in the area of kind of human rights and democracy, because when you suppress dissent, then grievances build up and build up and build up, and that gives it gives a voice to extremists, it gives legitimacy to extremists, but it also means when change comes, it can come very rapidly and disruptively. And so it becomes, I mean, we don't know how Libya will work out, for example, even a democratic Libya. So that should be one goal, I think, of the moderate movement. I think what you mentioned before about the world economy and not to have excessive wealth and poverty and not to have financial systems that can be immoderate. That's another very important area for moderates. And then the final area, I guess, is in the area of kind of tolerance of minorities, of refugees, individuals who get caught up in this globalized world and may be left out. And Malaysia has a very good record of a country that has been very accepting of many people coming here and earning an income. And Malaysia actually depends on those people. And the United States actually has quite a good record. You know, we have a large Muslim population now, and it's because so many people have moved there. So it couldn't be too prejudiced.
No, and we see that, you know, with things like the Arab Spring, where with Libya, the United States didn't interfere. You know?
Well, we did interfere, but we I think, provided some.
Yeah, we didn't lead. The U.S. didn't.
We didn't lead the military effort.
Exactly.
And I think that was very sensible.
Would you think it's been 10 years now? We commemorated the 10-year anniversary of September 11th last year.
Right.
Do you think that the Obama administration is taking a slightly softer stance towards, you know, more tolerant towards the Middle East?
Well, of course, I think and I think actually the George W. Bush administration also didn't mean to take an intolerant view toward the Middle East, but they meant to deal with terrorists, and they went too far.
Right.
And in the process of going too far,
they were a bit extreme.
Yeah. I mean, what you want is the U.S. after 9/11, everybody felt sympathetic with the United States. And so it was a mistake by the terrorists. And then we allowed that sympathy to move back toward. So I think it was a mistaken policy. And I don't think the Obama administration intends to repeat that policy. But I think that they have taken the right measures in Iraq. I don't know what the future of Iraq is going to be, but I don't think the United States can remain in Iraq forever. I think in Afghanistan there was an attempt to kind of build up, and I think that was a bit of a mistake too. I think in Afghanistan our basic interest is to keep international terrorists out of the space of Afghanistan. But and we want to help the Afghan people, and not just the Americans, but I think globally we want to help the American people. But to engage in a persistent war with the Taliban, again, runs a danger of actually creating more opposition than it does benefit for democratic forces in Afghanistan.
My last question to Dr. Charles would be, what would your personal hopes be for the global movement of moderates?
Well, I'd like to say the global movement of moderates, as I already indicated, have some very specific agendas, and then to work very hard on those. I think the real advantage that extremists have is that they're usually motivated by one issue, and so it's very powerful and people are very passionate about that issue. And so moderates have to be very passionate too, and if we're all over the map, we're not going to be passionate. So we really have to figure out 2 or 3 things that we work on.
Yeah, because I was just going to say, well, you know, the extremist is going to sit there and like, you know, what do these GMM people think they're trying to do? So then, you know, in response, we need to have, you know, a solid response to them.
Well, I kind of joked with Prime Minister after his speech in Hawaii, and I said, you know, in fact, I did say it publicly. I said, I really think this is important because after 9/11, we had, it seemed to me, two forces with real global vision. And one was Al-Qaeda, and the other were the American neocons. And the rest of us were all reacting to those 2 forces. And so we need a force at the center to set the agenda. In a way, the center always does set the agenda, but it doesn't do so in in a way that is so visible that a sympathizer, potential sympathizer of a terrorist, would say, no, this smaller group, they're the ones that are really going to make a difference here,
Right.
so I want to sympathize with them.
Well.
And that's the challenge for us.
We will definitely hope so. Well, thank you so much. It
Thank
was
you.
an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's nice to talk to you.